According to Cornell University's Wildlife Health Laboratory, between 10 and 20 million animals die each year from lead toxicosis. Countless others are saved from the same fate by wildlife rehabbers. Humans can also suffer from lead toxicosis. While deaths from lead poisoning in humans are rare now, it's still a very serious illness and it impacts certain demographics more than others. Resulting complications can include birth defects, neurological symptoms, organ failure, attention deficits, and a variety of other symptoms. I will be discussing how lead accumulates in the environment and how it impacts the health of both wildlife and humans. In pursuing a wildlife biology degree, much of my information will be coming from, my own interpretation of classes I've taken. I've taken a number of environmental and biology courses, and I've also observed the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center's treatment of many cases of lead toxicosis. My outside sources include Cornell University's Wildlife Health Laboratory, Iowa State University, the Amoeba Sisters, Johns Hopkins University, and the CDC. What is lead and how does lead poisoning occur? How is lead toxicity impacting wildlife? And why does that matter to us? These are all questions I'll be answering in the next several minutes to start an understanding of how lead behaves from an environmental standpoint is very important. Since lead's a toxin, it behaves like most toxins. Toxins leach into nearby soils and water sources as they break down over time. Toxins like lead that have been leached into soil and water are then absorbed by plants, and those plants are then consumed, and so on and so forth throughout the food chain. In other words, toxins bioaccumulate. They increase exponentially as you move up the food web. An example of this is a consumer that feeds on more and more animals that have been contaminated with a particular toxin. That toxin will just continue to rise within the organism's body. We don't use lead in the trophic levels, which are just your food chain levels. Your energy, it diminishes as you go up because we use energy, but we don't use toxins, and so the toxins just accumulate. Lead ammunition, fishing tackle, aviation fuel, and other lead-based pollutants, they don't just dissolve into thin air. They bioaccumulate and create harm to the earth, the environment, the organisms that live here. Now that we have a basic understanding of bioaccumulation and how toxins work, let's discuss how that negatively impacts wildlife. The planet's wildlife are heavily directly impacted by lead. As I mentioned earlier, millions of animals die each year from lead-related illnesses. Considering how bioaccumulation works, it probably won't surprise you when I say that predators and scavengers are the most at risk of lead poisoning. Waterfowl, according to Iowa State University, are also at a higher risk of lead poisoning. This is because of things like lost and littered fishing lures and sinkers. Those things, they contain lead often. Lead toxicosis symptoms in wildlife are usually pretty similar to humans. Loss of coordination, weakness, lethargy. We'll talk more about, the symptoms that accompany lead poisoning in humans here in a little bit, but lead poisoning in wild animals often leads to death because it's just a low likelihood that those animals will receive the treatment that they do need to survive. Now that we've discussed the lead impacts on wildlife, you may be on board, understanding of where we are about to come into the picture, but you may also be wondering, what does this have to do with me? Well, humans, like I said earlier, can also fall victim to lead poisoning, and toxins accumulate in our bodies just like they do in the bodies of other organisms. We, for the most part, are omnivores. We're usually pretty high on the food chain. And so in a survey, you were asked to complete. Every person to respond indicated that they've been fishing, and almost a fourth of you indicated that you've been hunting. For those of you who fish and hunt regularly and do so for consumption, you're at a higher risk of lead exposure. This is because, as previously discussed, consumption of too many food sources that are contaminated, it does lead to higher blood lead levels. So using lead tackle and ammunition can contaminate the game that you'll then be consuming. Children are also at a disproportionate risk. Johns Hopkins Medicine predicts that lead levels are higher than they should be in about 500,000 children in the US under the age of 5. So although lead poisoning, it doesn't typically lead to death these days, the symptoms, it's still a problem, and the symptoms are still pretty serious. They include things like birth defects, developmental delays, attention deficits, appetite, weight loss, personality changes, weakness, memory problems, organ failure. So toxins, including heavy metals like lead, they accumulate in the environment and the bodies of the organisms that live here. The resulting illnesses can become very severe, and they can even lead to death. Polluted lead can be leached into our environment and subsequently absorbed into our bodies, which again causes illness when above a threshold. Although an increased understanding and advancement in treatments has decreased mortality rates, the issue hasn't been eradicated altogether. So for this reason, it's still very important for all of us to kind of understand what lead poisoning is and how to prevent it. Additionally, many of you disclosed in the survey that I just talked about a little bit ago that you care deeply about our planet. So that's just another good reason to know about different pollutants. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me and to educate yourselves on lead poisoning and how it impacts not only our planet, but us directly.